Say it again, he said, his voice low enough that the elevator seemed to hold its breath. What exactly did you hear? The metal walls reflected us back in fragments. Me, small and out of place, clutching a folder I barely understood, and him, still as a shadow that didn't belong to the light. My pulse stuttered. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I wasn't supposed to be here. 12 minutes earlier, I had been standing on a rain-slicked sidewalk outside a building I couldn't afford to enter, my heels already aching, my phone buzzing with a message meant for someone else. You're late. Private auction, 32nd floor. I should have ignored it. I should have turned around, gone home, microwaved leftover pasta, and forgotten the whole thing. But I didn't. I told myself it was harmless. A mistake I could quietly fix. Inside, everything smelled like polished marble and expensive perfume. Men in tailored suits spoke in low voices. Women wore confidence like jewelry. I kept my head down, followed the directions, and stepped into a room I thought was the auction. It wasn't. The air felt different immediately. Heavier, quieter, like even the walls were listening. I remember the exact moment it shifted. A single word. Shipment. Then another. Thursday. Numbers followed, precise and cold, like they carried weight I couldn't measure. My fingers tightened around the glass in my hand. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. Enough to know I didn't belong. Enough to know I should leave. I turned too quickly. My elbow caught the edge of a table. Crystal shattered against the floor. The sound was sharp. Too sharp. Conversation stopped. And that's when I felt it. Not heard. Not seen. Felt. His gaze. When I looked up, he was already watching me. Not surprised. Not angry. Just certain. Like he had been waiting. Like I had just stepped exactly where he needed me to. And in that moment, I realized something I couldn't undo. I hadn't walked into the wrong room. I had walked into his world. And somehow, he already decided I wasn't leaving. I did not answer him right away because the truth was sitting on my tongue, fragile and dangerous, and I had no idea which version of it would keep me safe. The elevator hummed softly as it moved, a smooth mechanical glide that felt too calm for the tension tightening in my chest. I could feel his eyes on me, not in a rushed or impatient way, but in a way that made it clear he was used to waiting, used to people eventually giving him exactly what he wanted. My fingers curled tighter around the folder I still held, the edges pressing into my palm like it could anchor me to something normal, something outside of this moment. I did not understand it. I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended, steady but thin, like it was trying not to break. I heard a few words. That is all. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, not quite anything human enough to name. He took one slow step closer, and the space inside the elevator seemed to shrink, the air growing warmer, heavier. People always say that, he replied, his tone even, controlled, as if we were discussing something ordinary, something harmless. They think not understanding will protect them. His hand moved then, not touching me, not even close, but resting against the wall just beside my shoulder. It was a small motion, controlled, but it boxed me in without force, without urgency. That was what made it worse. There was no rush, no panic, just certainty. I swallowed, aware of every breath I took, every inch of distance between us. I was not meant to be there, I said, the words coming faster now, trying to explain something I was not sure he cared about. I got a message. It was not for me. I thought it was an auction. I made a mistake. His gaze did not shift. If anything, it sharpened, like he was measuring the spaces between my words instead of the words themselves. And yet, he said quietly, you stayed long enough to listen. That landed harder than anything else he had said so far, because it was not entirely wrong. I had stayed. For a second too long. Long enough for curiosity to outweigh caution. Long enough to hear things I could not unhear. The elevator slowed, a soft chime echoing through the enclosed space as it reached another floor, but the doors did not open. Of course they did not. He had not moved. What is your name? He asked. The question caught me off guard, simple in a way that felt out of place. Emily. I answered automatically, then forced myself to add, Emily Carter. Saying my full name felt like giving something away, like handing over a piece of control I did not know how to keep. He nodded once, as if confirming something he already suspected. Emily. He repeated, testing it, letting it settle in the air between us. Then, softer, You do not belong in rooms like that." There was no judgment in his voice. No insult. Just a statement that felt too accurate to argue with. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. "I know," I said. For a brief moment, something shifted. Not in him, but in the space around us. The tension did not disappear, but it changed shape. Less sharp, more deliberate. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. The sound was quiet, but it broke the stillness like a crack in glass. He did not take his eyes off me as he reached for it, glanced down for less than a second, then slipped it back. Whatever the message was, it did not matter more than this. More than me. That realization settled somewhere deep in my chest, uncomfortable and heavy. "Here is what is going to happen," he said, his voice returning to that calm, controlled rhythm. "You are going to walk out of this building. You are going to go home. You are going to continue your life exactly as it was before tonight." My heart lifted slightly, cautious, uncertain. That sounded like an escape, like a way out I had not expected. But then he tilted his head just enough, his gaze holding mine with quiet precision. "And you are not going to talk about what you heard," he added. "Not to friends, not to family, not to anyone who thinks they should know." The lift in my chest faltered. "I would not," I said quickly. "I do not even know what it was." Again, that almost smile. "You know enough," he said. The words were softer this time, but they carried more weight than anything else he had said. The elevator chimed again, and this time, when it slowed, he stepped back. The sudden space between us felt disorienting, like I had been holding my breath for too long and was only just realizing it. The door slid open to a quiet hallway lined with dim lighting and polished floors. He gestured slightly with his hand, a silent indication that I could go. I hesitated for half a second, just long enough to feel his gaze on me one more time. Then I stepped out. My heels echoed against the floor as I walked, each step faster than the last, my pulse still racing, my thoughts scattered and loud. I did not look back. I told myself not to. The hallway stretched ahead, leading to an exit I could see in the distance, glass doors reflecting the faint glow of the city outside. Freedom, or something that looked like it. But as I reached for the handle and pushed it open, stepping out into the cool night air, I felt it again. Not fear. Not exactly. Something quieter. Colder. The kind of certainty that does not need to be spoken out loud. I was walking away, but I was not leaving. And somewhere behind me, in a building I should never have entered, a man who barely raised his voice had already decided exactly where I belonged. I told myself it was over the moment the cold air hit my face, the city noise rushing back like nothing had happened, like I could just step into a cab, go home, and let the night dissolve into something forgettable. But my hands were still trembling when I reached my apartment door, and the silence inside felt louder than anything I had heard in that room. I locked the door twice, then leaned against it, trying to slow my breathing, trying to convince myself that I had walked away clean, that he had let me go. But when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter, I knew before I even picked it up that some things do not end when you leave. They follow, they wait, and sometimes they already know where you live. The screen lit up with a number I did not recognize. No name, no location, just a string of digits that felt too deliberate to be random. And for a second I considered letting it ring out, pretending I never saw it, pretending that if I ignored it long enough, it would disappear along with everything else from tonight. But my hand moved before my thoughts could catch up, fingers brushing the screen, answering the call in a breath I did not remember taking. And silence greeted me first, not empty silence, but the kind that felt intentional, measured, like someone deciding exactly how long to make me wait before speaking. And then his voice came through, calm, steady, unmistakable. "You made it home." Not a question, never a question, and my stomach tightened as I pushed myself away from the door, walking slowly into my apartment as if distance could somehow soften the sound of him in my ear. "How did you get this number?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, trying not to let the edge of unease slip through, but he did not answer that. Not directly, he never did. "You live alone," he said instead, and I stopped moving completely, the words settling into the room like something physical, something that took up space, my eyes drifting across the small details I had never thought twice about before: the coat draped over the chair, the half-finished cup of coffee on the counter, the window I always left slightly open. "That is not a question either," he added quietly, and I realized then that this was not about information. It was about control, about showing me how much he already knew without ever needing to explain how. "What do you want?" I said, softer now. Not because I was afraid to speak louder, but because something about his tone made it feel unnecessary, like the volume did not matter when the distance between us had already been erased. There was a pause, brief, deliberate, like he was considering which answer to give me. "Nothing you cannot handle," he said, and I almost laughed at that. Almost, because the words sounded simple, harmless even, but everything about tonight had taught me that nothing around him was ever simple. "You said I could go back to my life," I reminded him, my grip tightening around the phone as I moved toward the window, glancing down at the street below, headlights passing, people walking, normal life continuing without noticing the shift that had happened inside mine. "You can," he replied, and for a second, just a second, it sounded like he meant it, like there was a version of this where I could hang up, go to bed, wake up, and pretend this never happened. But then he continued, his voice lowering just enough to make every word land sharper. "As long as your life stays quiet." The word lingered, deliberate, carrying more meaning than it should have, and I leaned my forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window, closing my eyes for a moment, trying to think, trying to find some angle where this made sense, where I could regain control of something, anything. "And if it does not?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, and the silence that followed was different this time, heavier, not threatening, but certain, and when he finally spoke, it was softer than before, almost thoughtful. "Then it will not be your life anymore." Not said with force, not said with anger, just stated, like a fact that had already been decided, and I opened my eyes, staring at my reflection in the darkened glass, barely recognizing the person looking back at me, because she was still standing in that elevator, still hearing his voice, still realizing that walking away had not meant anything at all. "Why me?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. Not really. But this time, he gave me one. Simple, direct, "Because you listened." And something about that settled deeper than fear, deeper than panic. It was clarity, sharp and undeniable. I had not been chosen by accident. I had not been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had stepped into something and stayed just long enough to be seen. And now being seen meant something I did not yet fully understand. "Get some rest, Emily," he said after a moment, his tone shifting again, softer, almost indifferent now, like the conversation had reached its natural end. "Tomorrow will feel different." And before I could respond, before I could ask what that meant or how he could possibly know, the line went dead. The quiet of my apartment rushing back in, louder than before, filling every corner, every thought, and I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, the city lights flickering below, realizing that he was right about one thing. Tomorrow would feel different, not because anything around me had changed, but because I had. Because once you understand that someone is watching, truly watching, you never move the same way again. I did not sleep, not really. I lay there staring at the ceiling while the city moved on outside my window. Every distant car passing like a reminder that the world had not changed, only mine had. And sometime around 5 in the morning, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew sunlight was cutting through the blinds and thin sharp lines across my walls. Too bright, too normal. And for a moment, I almost convinced myself it had all been a dream until I saw my phone on the nightstand. Screen dark, silent, but somehow heavier than it should have been, like it was holding something it was not showing me yet. I pushed myself up slowly, my body tired but my mind already awake, already replaying everything from the night before in fragments that refused to settle into anything logical. I moved through my morning routine automatically, brushing my teeth, pulling on clothes, making coffee that I barely tasted, each action feeling slightly off, like I was watching myself instead of actually living it. And when I stepped outside my apartment building, the air felt colder than usual, sharper, like it was trying to wake me up in a way sleep never could. I told myself I needed to go to work, needed to keep everything normal, because normal was the only thing I still had control over. The subway ride was crowded like always, people packed shoulder to shoulder, scrolling on their phones, sipping coffee, talking about plans that felt impossibly distant from mine, and I tried to focus on that, on the ordinary rhythm of it all. But every time the train slowed, every time someone stepped too close, I felt it again, that quiet awareness, like someone somewhere was paying attention to every move I made. By the time I reached the gallery, my nerves had settled just enough for me to breathe without thinking about it. The familiar scent of paint and polished wood grounding me as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The soft hum of the lights flickering on above me. This was my space, small, predictable, safe, or at least it had been. I set my bag down behind the counter and checked the schedule for the day. 2 private viewings, 1 delivery, nothing unusual, nothing that should have connected to him. And for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe it would stay that way, that maybe last night would remain exactly that, a night, something contained, something separate from everything else. But then I saw it, sitting neatly on the counter where I knew I had not left anything. A small black box, perfectly centered, as if it had been placed there with intention. My breath caught slightly as I stepped closer, every instinct telling me not to touch it, and yet I already knew I would. Because ignoring things had not worked so far, because pretending this was not happening had not changed anything. I reached out slowly, fingers brushing the surface, cool, smooth, no label, no note, nothing to explain how it had gotten here or who had left it, but I did not need a note. I already knew. The realization settled quietly, without panic this time, just a steady understanding that this was not coincidence. This was continuation. I opened the box carefully, the lid lifting without resistance, and inside, resting on dark velvet, was a single key, simple, metallic, unmarked, the kind of object that could mean anything or everything depending on who handed it to you. I stared at it for a long moment, my thoughts racing through possibilities I could not confirm, until my phone vibrated softly in my pocket, the sound cutting through the silence of the gallery like a signal I had been expecting without admitting it. I did not rush this time. I did not hesitate either. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen, the same unknown number, and answered. "You found it," his voice said, calm, certain, like he had been watching the exact moment I opened the box. And I looked down at the key again, turning it slightly between my fingers, the metal catching the light in a way that felt deliberate, like it was meant to be seen. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steadier now, not because I was less affected, but because I was starting to understand the pattern. He did not answer right away. That brief pause again, controlled, intentional. Then, "An option," he said simply, and I let out a small breath, something between disbelief and quiet realization. "It does not feel like one," I replied, because it did not, because nothing about this felt optional. "It is," he said, softer this time, almost patient. "You can leave it there, walk away, and continue pretending last night was nothing." And for a second I pictured that, leaving the key exactly where it was, locking the gallery at the end of the day, going home, choosing not to step further into whatever this was. But the image did not hold. It slipped away too easily, replaced by the truth I could not ignore, that I was already in this, already seen, already part of something I did not choose but could not fully refuse. "And if I take it?" I asked quietly, my eyes still fixed on the small piece of metal in my hand. And this time when he answered, there was something different in his tone, not darker, not heavier, just clearer. "Then you stop guessing," he said, "and you start understanding." And I closed my eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of that settle into place, because that was the real choice, not between staying or leaving, but between not knowing and knowing, between fear and clarity. And when I opened my eyes again, the gallery looked the same, the paintings, the light, the quiet, everything unchanged, except for me. Because I knew something now that I had not known before. Some doors do not open with force, they open with a decision. And the moment you take the key, you accept that you were never meant to stay outside. I did not realize I was holding my breath until I felt the slight tremor in my fingers, the key still resting against my palm like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting for me to notice it. And the silence in the gallery stretched just long enough for the weight of the decision to settle in, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet shift that made everything else feel less important. I turned the key once between my fingers, watching how the light caught its edges, how something so small could carry so much intention. "Where does it go?" I asked, my voice steady, not because I felt in control, but because I was beginning to understand that control was not something he gave. It was something he allowed you to think you had. There was a pause on the other end, Not hesitation, never that. More like he was deciding how much I was ready to hear. Locker 42, he said finally. Grand Central, lower level. And the specificity of it made my chest tighten just slightly, not fear, not exactly. More like anticipation dressed as caution. I glanced around the gallery again, at the quiet walls, the paintings that suddenly felt like they belonged to a version of me that was already fading. And if I do not go? I asked, because I needed to say it out loud, needed to hear the alternative even if I already knew it would not change anything. His response came without delay this time. Calm, certain. Then nothing changes, he said, except what you will never understand. And that was it. No pressure, no demand. Just the outline of a choice that did not feel like one. I ended the call slowly, lowering the phone without taking my eyes off the key. The gallery clock ticking softly on the wall behind me, marking seconds that felt heavier than they should. I told myself I could finish my shift, wait until closing, think it through, be rational. But the thought dissolved almost as quickly as it formed, because rational did not explain why the key was already in my hand, why I had not put it back in the box, why I was already reaching for my coat, locking the gallery door behind me with movements that felt automatic, inevitable. The city outside moved the same as always, taxis rushing past, people crossing streets without looking twice. Everything normal, everything untouched by the decision unfolding quietly in my chest. The subway ride to Grand Central felt shorter than it should have, each stop passing in a blur of announcements and shifting crowds. And when I stepped onto the platform, the air felt different again, cooler, echoing with footsteps and distant voices that blended into something almost rhythmic. I followed the signs without thinking. Lower level, lockers, the directions clear enough that I did not have to stop, did not have to question where I was going. And that realization stayed with me, subtle but sharp, like this path had been mapped out long before I ever knew it existed. Locker 42 was exactly where it should have been. Nothing about it stood out, no mark, no sign, just another metal door among dozens of identical ones. And yet I knew, before I even stepped closer, that this was it. I hesitated for half a second, not because I was unsure, but because I understood what hesitation meant now. It was the last moment before something shifted permanently. I slid the key into the lock, the metal clicking softly, precise, fitting perfectly in a way that felt too deliberate to ignore. And when I turned it, the sound echoed louder than it should have, like the space itself was listening. I opened the door slowly, my breath catching just slightly as the contents came into view. Inside, there was no money, no documents. Nothing dramatic or obvious, just a single envelope, thick, cream-colored, sealed, resting neatly against the back of the locker like it had been waiting. I reached in, my fingers brushing the paper, lifting it carefully, the weight of it surprising, not heavy, but significant, like it carried something more than just what was inside. My name was written across the front in clean, precise lettering, Emily Carter, and the sight of it sent a quiet ripple through my chest, because it meant this was never random, never accidental. I had been expected. I stepped back slightly, closing the locker without thinking, the click of it locking behind me sounding final, definitive. I stood there for a moment, the envelope in my hands, the noise of the station continuing around me like nothing had changed, and for the first time since all of this began, I did not feel like I was being watched, not because I was alone, but because I understood something I had not before. This was not about watching, it was about guiding, about placing each step exactly where it needed to be. I ran my thumb lightly along the edge of the envelope, feeling the seal, knowing that once I opened it, there would be no more guessing, no more distance between me and whatever this was. And as I took a slow breath, the thought settled clearly, quietly. Some choices do not come with instructions, they come with consequences, and the moment you open them, you stop being who you were before. I did not open it right away because something in me understood that the moment I broke that seal, there would be no space left between curiosity and consequence. So I stood there in the middle of Grand Central, people moving around me in every direction, footsteps echoing against marble floors, voices blending into a constant hum that felt distant compared to the quiet tension in my hands. My name still staring back at me from the front of the envelope, like proof that this had been planned. Long before I ever stepped into that room, I exhaled slowly, sliding my thumb under the edge of the seal, the paper giving way with a soft tear that sounded louder than it should have. And for a second, everything else faded. The station, the noise, the movement, it all slipped into the background as I pulled the contents free. Inside was a single sheet, thick, precise, folded once, and I unfolded it carefully, my eyes moving across the clean lines of text. No greeting, no explanation, just an address, a time, and beneath it, a single sentence. If you came this far, you already understand why you are here. I stared at it longer than necessary, reading it again even though nothing about it changed, because it was not meant to explain, it was meant to confirm. I folded the paper back slowly, slipping it into the envelope again, my thoughts moving faster now, not scattered like before, but aligning, forming something clearer, something sharper. I should have felt overwhelmed. I should have stepped back, walked away, chosen not to go further, but instead there was something else settling in, something quieter, a strange kind of focus, like the uncertainty was starting to narrow into direction. I moved toward the exit without thinking, the envelope tucked securely in my bag, the city air hitting me again as I stepped outside, colder now, or maybe I just noticed it more. I checked the address once more as I walked, recognizing the street immediately, not because I had been there before, but because it was the kind of place you heard about, private, exclusive, the kind of building that did not list its tenants publicly. I hesitated at the corner for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to consider turning back, long enough to imagine what that would look like, going home, locking my door, pretending none of this existed. But the image did not hold. It never did, because I knew now that pretending was not protection, it was delay, and delay only worked when the other side was not already ahead of you. I crossed the street, my steps steady, deliberate, the building rising in front of me, with polished glass and quiet security that did not need to announce itself. The doorman did not stop me, did not question me. He simply glanced once, then stepped aside, as if he had been expecting me to. That realization no longer surprised me the way it should have. It just confirmed what I was already beginning to accept. This was not chance. This was design. Inside, the lobby was quiet. Almost too quiet, the kind of silence that felt controlled rather than empty. I approached the front desk, the envelope still in my hand now. No reason to hide it. Not here. Not anymore. I have an appointment, I said, my voice even, the words coming easier than they had any right to. The woman behind the desk did not ask for my name, did not ask for identification. She simply nodded once and gestured toward the elevator behind her. Top floor, she said. And that was it. No hesitation, no doubt. I stepped into the elevator, the doors closing smoothly behind me, the reflection in the metal walls catching my eye again, but this time I did not look away, because I could see it now. The difference, subtle but undeniable. I was not the same person who had stepped into an elevator last night unsure, unprepared, out of place. Something had shifted, not because I wanted it to, but because I had followed the path far enough that turning back no longer felt real. The elevator moved upward, steady, quiet, each floor passing without interruption, and as it slowed at the top, a single thought settled clearly in my mind. Not fear, not doubt, just understanding. Some doors are not meant to be avoided. They are meant to be opened, and when they finally are, you realize they were never locked to keep you out. They were locked to see if you would choose to come in. The doors opened without a sound, just a smooth parting of polished metal that revealed a space too quiet to be accidental. The kind of quiet that made you aware of every step you took, every breath you drew. And for a moment I did not move, not because I was afraid, but because something in me understood that this was the line, the point where observation ended and participation began. I stepped out slowly, the floor beneath my heels soft enough to absorb the sound, the lighting dim but precise, casting everything in a controlled glow that felt intentional rather than decorative. The room was not large, not overwhelming, but everything in it was deliberate. Clean lines, dark wood, a single wall of glass stretching from floor to ceiling. The city spread out beyond it like something distant, something separate from where I stood now. And he was there, exactly where I knew he would be, standing with his back to me, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the glass, looking out over the skyline as if he had all the time in the world. as if this moment had been waiting for him rather than the other way around. I took another step forward, the envelope still in my hand, and he did not turn immediately, did not acknowledge me right away, and somehow that felt more intentional than anything else he had done, like he was allowing me to arrive fully before he decided to look. "You came," he said finally, his voice carrying easily through the quiet space, calm, certain, and I realized then that he had known I would, not hoped, not guessed, known. "You made it very clear that I would," I replied, my voice steady, more grounded than I expected, because somewhere along the way, the uncertainty had started to settle into something else, something closer to awareness. He turned then, slowly, his gaze finding mine with that same quiet precision that had unsettled me from the beginning. But this time I did not look away. I held it, not as a challenge, not as defiance, but because I understood now that looking away would not change anything. "I did not make you do anything," he said, and the way he said it made the words feel less like denial and more like a statement of fact. "I gave you direction." I exhaled softly, the envelope tightening slightly in my grip. "That does not feel different," I said, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, subtle, almost unnoticeable, but there, like a flicker of something beneath the surface. "It is," he replied, stepping closer, not rushing, never rushing, each movement controlled, deliberate. "Control forces a choice," he continued, his voice lowering just enough to make the space between us feel smaller. "Direction reveals the one you were already going to make." I let that settle, not because I agreed, but because I could not immediately argue with it, because somewhere in everything that had happened, there was truth in it that I did not want to admit out loud. I lifted the envelope slightly, my fingers brushing the edge. "You said I would understand," I said, and he nodded once, his attention shifting briefly to the envelope before returning to me. "Then open it," he said, simple, direct, and I realized then that this was the real moment, not stepping into the building, not taking the key, but this, standing here, choosing to move forward without knowing exactly what waited on the other side. I broke the seal slowly, the paper giving way beneath my fingers as I pulled the contents free again, this time not in a crowded station, not surrounded by noise, but here, in a silence that made every small movement feel amplified. I unfolded the sheet, my eyes scanning the lines more carefully now, and as I read, something shifted again, not fear, not panic, but clarity, sharp and undeniable, because it was not just an address this time, not just a time. It was information, specific, detailed, names I recognized from the gallery, shipments I had seen listed in records that did not match what they were supposed to be, connections that should not have existed but did, and at the bottom, a single line that made everything else fall into place. "You already saw enough to recognize this." My breath caught slightly, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant, because it confirmed what I had been avoiding since the beginning. This was not random. I had not been chosen by chance. I had noticed something before that night, something small, something I had dismissed, and he had seen that, recognized it before I did. I looked up slowly, meeting his gaze again. "You have been watching me longer than I thought," I said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating it the way it had finally become clear, and he did not deny it, did not soften it. "I pay attention," he said simply, and the weight of that settled differently now, less like a threat, more like a fact I had to decide what to do with. I glanced back down at the paper, then back at him. The distance between who I had been and where I was standing now narrowing into something I could no longer ignore. "Why show me this?" I asked quietly. Because that was the question that mattered now. Not what I had seen, not what I knew, but why he was letting me see it at all. And for the first time since this began, his answer did not come immediately. There was a pause, real this time, like he was choosing the truth instead of the simplest response. "Because you are already part of it," he said finally, and the words landed without force, without drama, but with a certainty that did not need either. I held his gaze, the paper still in my hand, the city stretching out behind him, and in that moment, I understood something I had been circling since the beginning. I had thought this was about being pulled into something I did not choose, something external, something imposed, but it was not. It was about recognition, about seeing the line I had already crossed without realizing it. And once you see it, you cannot pretend you are still on the other side. I folded the paper slowly, my movements deliberate, controlled, because now I understood the rhythm of this, the pacing, the way each step led to the next without ever needing to be forced. And as I looked back at him, one thought settled clearly, quietly, with no room left for doubt. Some truths do not trap you. They reveal where you have been standing all along. I did not speak right away because there was nothing left to say that would take me back to who I was before this, and the silence between us no longer felt like pressure. It felt like space, deliberate, measured, waiting for me to decide what I would do with it. I looked down at the paper one more time, tracing the lines that now made sense in a way they had not before, the connections no longer abstract, the patterns no longer hidden. And I realized something that settled deeper than anything else he had said. I had not just seen enough to be involved. I had understood enough to matter. And that was the difference. That was why I was here. I folded the paper carefully, not out of hesitation, but out of intention, each movement controlled, steady, like I was learning the rhythm of a world that did not rush, did not react, only moved when it chose to. And when I looked back up at him, my voice did not shake. "You said I am already part of it," I said quietly, meeting his gaze without stepping back. "Then tell me what that means." He watched me for a moment, not surprised, not impressed, just attentive, like this was the point he had been waiting for, the moment where I stopped asking what was happening and started asking what it required. "It means," he said slowly, stepping closer until the distance between us was no longer something I could ignore, "that you stop pretending you are on the outside." His tone was calm, but there was something firmer beneath it now, not force, not pressure, just clarity. "It means you decide whether you are going to look away again or actually see." I let that settle, the words echoing quietly in my mind, because he was right about one thing. I had seen things before, small details, inconsistencies, moments that did not align, and I had chosen to ignore them, chosen to stay comfortable, chosen to remain separate. And that choice had led me here just as much as anything else. I exhaled slowly, my grip loosening slightly around the paper. "And if I choose to see?" I asked, my voice steady, deliberate. "What happens then?" This time his answer came without pause, without hesitation. "Then you stop being a risk," he said, and for a second, that word landed sharply. Risk, not accusation, not threat, just classification, something defined by what it could become if left unchecked. But he continued before I could respond, his voice softer now, more measured. "And you become an asset." The shift in language was subtle, but it changed everything. Not because it was reassuring, but because it was honest. It told me exactly where I stood without trying to disguise it as something else. I held his gaze, letting that reality settle fully, not resisting it, not accepting it blindly, just understanding it for what it was. "You are not asking," I said quietly, the realization forming clearly now. "You are offering." And for the first time, something in his expression changed in a way I could not ignore. Not a smile, not approval, but recognition. Like I had finally aligned with something he had seen from the beginning. "I do not ask for things that have already decided themselves," he replied, and the weight of that truth settled deeper than anything else, because it meant this was never about convincing me. It was about waiting for me to recognize what I had already stepped into. I glanced briefly toward the city beyond the glass, the lights stretching endlessly, the movement constant, unaware, and I realized that everything out there still existed exactly as it had before. Nothing had changed except the way I saw it, the way I understood where I stood in relation to it. I turned back to him. The space between us no longer something I wanted to close or escape, just something that existed, neutral, defined by what came next. "And if I walk away now?" I said, not as a challenge, but as a final question, something I needed to hear answered out loud. He did not move, did not react, just held my gaze with that same quiet certainty. "Then you will always know that you chose not to understand," he said, and there was no judgment in it, no threat, just a statement of consequence that did not need to be emphasized to be real. I let out a slow breath, feeling the last of the hesitation fade, not because the situation had become simple, but because it had become clear, and clarity does not remove risk, it just removes confusion. I stepped forward slightly, closing the smallest part of the distance between us, not as submission, not as surrender, but as acknowledgement of where I was, of what I had seen, of what I was choosing to do with it. Then I am not walking away, I said, the words quiet but steady. And in that moment, something settled between us, not agreement, not trust, but alignment, the beginning of something defined not by force, but by recognition. He nodded once, a small movement, controlled, but enough to mark the shift that had just happened. Good, he said simply, turning slightly toward the glass again, his attention already moving forward, as if the decision had been the only thing that mattered, and now that it was made,